Well, that was a pretty good first boss. Wait, touching him still kills you? No. No, I have to redo the whole thing? Are you kidding me? Come on, man. Really? This video is a request from one of my close friends. Be careful what you wish for, Carlos. So, we all know about Naughty Dog's Crash trilogy, the second game specifically being one of the greatest 3D platformers of all time. In my opinion, obviously. After 22 years, we finally got a worthy sequel to the original trilogy in Crash 4. But some of you might be wondering, what happened during those 22 years? After Sony sold the rights to Crash, Activision obviously didn't just sit on their asses for 2 decades. No, of course they tried to make their own games, to very middling success. Their first major release, yes, I know Crash Bash exists, let's just pretend that doesn't count, was Wrath of Cortex, a notoriously ambitious game with insanely long loading screens and a strange grab bag of gimmick levels. So, basically just a worse version of Crash 3. Overall, it's not a bad game, but could have used a lot more polish and less shitty minigames. So, did Traveler's Tales take what they learned from developing Wrath of Cortex into their next game? Short answer, no. Long answer, fuck no. Crash Twinsanity is the most unfinished game I've ever played. It's buggy as hell, has missing sound effects, straight up cuts past unfinished scenes, and reuses entire level sections with very little variation. So, is it a bad game? Surprisingly, no. It's actually pretty fun when it works. Before I get into this, remember to do the things that the YouTube algorithm likes. You all know what that means by now. Support me on Patreon if you can, every little bit helps. Alright, on to the video. So despite Wrath of Cortex being essentially discount Crash 4, Twinsanity is something completely different. Gone are the warp rooms and linear hallway style levels, replaced by mini sandboxes connected together with linear set piece levels. I know that's a strange description, but I'll elaborate in a minute. Basic movement control's fine, but the double jump just feels wrong. If you don't use it at the height of your initial jump, but instead wait to use it for max distance, the second jump is only half as high. Which wouldn't matter except that they got rid of the slide high jump. You know, that was only the single most satisfying part of Crash 2's platforming. Instead, the slide can't be cancelled with a jump anymore, and the slide jump is now a long jump. Words can't describe how poorly this controls. Just don't slide. Don't fucking do it, dude. Just don't ever slide. You will slide straight off the cliff every time. And even if you do manage to time it right, the long jump can't be controlled in midair, so if you miscalculated the jump, you're dead. Probably about half of my deaths across the entire game were from sliding. Other than that, though, the game control's mostly okay. Now about the level design. It's a clusterfuck. This game is essentially a series of loosely connected scenes with jokes, separated by a bunch of random gameplay sections. There are still a few traditional platforming levels, which are mostly good, but a lot of this game is essentially gimmick sections and simple puzzles. It's hard to even describe what this means in an analytical sense, so I'll give you a brief overview of the first world. The first section is a completely optional exploration level with a brief tutorial, followed by a pretty good first boss. Then suddenly you're thrust into a rolling ball section, then a beat 'em up mini-boss, then a new Cortex throwing puzzle section, then a cool timed platforming escape from a drill section, then another skippable exploration section, then Cortex randomly gets attacked by bees, so you have to do a 2D platform escort mission, then there's a forced stealth section, then there's a boulder chase, except the boulder is a bunch of spear-wielding aborigines, and finally, a boss against a giant 4-armed tiki. And that's just the first 2 hours of the game. These variety gameplay sections are a mixed bag to say the least. The 2 snowboarding sections later in the game are really fun and control surprisingly well, but the 4 stealth sections are horrible and they just don't work. There's no warning for when the enemy is about to start looking for you, you've just gotta time it. And sometimes you get killed anyway, even if the enemy is dead. What? Are you fucking kidding me? He was already dead. Are you serious? One of my only 2 game overs was from these parts. Most of the other gimmick levels are just okay in comparison. You also get to play as Cortex and his niece in a couple of levels.
My daughter, niece!
Cortex can't jump for shit with his baby legs, so most of his gameplay is just blasting enemies with his ray gun. Unlike Crash 4, he can't do anything special. For some reason, his blaster has limited ammo, which I guess was a last-ditch effort to add a little complexity to his sections, but that's it really, you just shoot stuff. Nina is pretty similar to Crash. She can spin and jump about the same height, but no double jump, instead a robot grapple arm that can swing from fixed points. I can see where Toys for Bob got the idea for Tawna's gameplay. You only play as Nina twice in the entire game, so she didn't really make much of an impression. This carries over to the cutscenes as well, because she doesn't even have a single line of dialogue. And she's not the only character that doesn't have a voice, but I'll touch on that later. Surprisingly, this game has a lot of boss fights of highly variable quality. A few of them are pretty good, especially the Dingodile fight, which is easily one of the best bosses in this entire franchise. Unlike most video game bosses of a similar style, Dingodile has a unique attack pattern for every stage of the fight, meaning he has 4 distinct phases, 3 out of those 4 introducing a new attack. He makes for a really good challenge, easily one of the highlights of the game. But most of the other bosses are your basic bitch dodge the same attack patterns until they stun themselves type. The Engine and Entropy Embryo bosses are extremely boring examples of this. Before I end this section, I do want to give a little more attention to the 2 snowboarding sections in the game, even though the second one is literally a copy-paste job of the first, just with more nitro crates and an evil version of Crash that damages you on contact. I still had a great time with these levels. The controls are fairly smooth, and if you hold circle you move twice as fast at the cost of your handling. Despite being fairly simple, these segments felt more complete than most of the rest of the game. The only thing that distinctly bothered me was the intro to these levels. They're clearly supposed to be a joke, but this shit weirded me out if I'm being honest.
Oh, that's hot. That's hot.
It doesn't help that you're literally riding Cortex during these segments. It all comes across as some developer's perverse fantasy.
Oh, Crash. The farmer's market is tomorrow, and my wampa trees won't grow, for my orchard is riddled with greedy worms. If you rid my land of these pests, I'll give you this power crystal.
I'm an evil scientist. What do you expect? This isn't a game.
I think a big part of the appeal of this game, or at least it was for my buddy Carlos, is that this game has a really unique charm to it. It has that kind of stupid, funny humor of Dumb and Dumber, with a few legitimately clever jokes thrown in. This game even managed to get me to laugh at a fart joke. That's a true mark of quality.
I'm stuck! The greatest evil scientist in the world! Stuck in a pipe. How could things get any worse?
Part of the charm comes from the unique soundtrack, which is almost done exclusively in a cappella, which is impressive because each track sounds fairly unique, and with the exception of one in particular, I wasn't annoyed by them either. This is highly subjective, of course, but personally I thought the a cappella soundtrack was a great choice, and the soundtrack will be playing throughout this video, so you can judge for yourself. The sheer randomness of the plot in this game is also endearing in a way, although it's partially due to just how unfinished this game was on release. The game begins with Cortex paralyzing Coco and slapping on a blonde wig to disguise himself and lure Crash into a trap. Our Bandicoot friend is a dangerous in this game, so of course he fell for it. This leads to a gathering of a bunch of Crash's old villains, all of whom never show up in the game again, with the exception of Dingodile. They went to the trouble of modeling and animating them just for this scene. Now, of course, originally they were all going to be in the game, But the PS2 era was before delays were common, and since patches were impossible, we're stuck with this mess. After beating the shit out of each other, Crash and Cortex have to team up to escape the mines, where completely out of nowhere, our main villains show up. Two space parrot twins who come from the 10th dimension. What does this have to do with Crash Bandicoot? Well, we find out later in the game that as a child, Cortex accidentally sent them to the 10th dimension.
I want to defeat the giant monkey man and save the 9th dimension!
Yeah, it's safe to say that the plot is not meant to be taken seriously. But it's a Crash game, what did you expect? Though where I draw the line is the blatantly unfinished shit that just takes you out of the experience. For example, at the end of the snowboarding level, a giant snowball smashes Dingodile's house, which there's no sound effect for, by the way. Cortex mentions treasure, and just as it looks like a boss fight is about to start, the cutscene just ends, and Dingodile is gone. Later, after defeating Engine, who has no voice lines, like Nina, you randomly get chased by a hungry walrus, and then Embryo and Entropy just show up out of nowhere asking Crash about treasure, despite treasure never being a plot point in this game. What the fuck is going on? Also, there's a random Spyro cameo near the end, which is cool, I guess, but I'm pretty biased toward any Spyro shit, as my fans will know. So honestly, it's pretty hard to recommend this game. You have to have a high tolerance for bugs and a love for 3D platformers to play this. Despite some really solid platforming sections and a couple good gimmick levels, most of the rest of the game is just average or even painful to play in a couple of parts. Luckily, most of you would be playing it on an emulator anyway, so at least it won't cost you anything but time and a little bit of your sanity. Just play Crash 2, 3, and 4 instead. I've got a review on Crash 4 that nobody watched, so check that out if you want to hear my thoughts. So, whatever became of Traveler's Tales? Well, they made a little game called Lego Star Wars, and you probably know the rest. Alright guys, sorry Carlos, if I was a little harsh on one of your favorite games there, you know, I didn't do it on purpose, this is what I thought. But, you know, remember to like, favorite, subscribe, anyway, all that shit, whatever. Support me on Patreon if you can afford it. And, yeah, you know, my first Patreon review is up next, Thief 2. I'm kind of excited to talk about that. I'm a fan of stealth games, as I've said a couple times. You know, still gonna make that Deus Ex review, because I love Human Revolution, I think it's a great game. But yeah, other than that, I think I'm gonna take a look at that, like, Immortal Phoenix Rising game or whatever, because I'm assuming it's part of Ubisoft Plus, which, you know, I still got my subscription going for that, so who knows, maybe that'll actually be a good Ubisoft game. And then Cyberpunk, obviously, December 10th, that's gonna be taking up all my time for several days, because I'm crazy excited for that game. I know some of you guys aren't, but, you know, for me personally, I'm very excited, so I'm just glad it's not gonna get delayed again. It looks like review copies are out in the wild, so yeah, I don't think it's going to be delayed. I think it's safe to say. Alright, well, that's it. See you next time, guys.